Well, I kind of went through actually Pitchfork's like lists of the last 10 years. I thought it was an interesting question and hard to kind of define like what is a classic, what is recent, quote unquote. So I looked at the last 10 years of Pitchfork's lists and checked Rate Your Music and stuff like that, and just kind of compiled a quick list I want to throw at you guys to see what your opinions are, because as I looked through to see like, okay, what is it? What are some universal recent classics? I got the feeling that we're going to disagree on a lot of these, but I want to see if I'm right. So first up, why don't we talk for just a second about Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, which Clyde mentioned in their email there. What do you guys think? Is it a classic?
Well, they even mentioned that I said that I don't really enjoy that record that much, and I don't. I think it's very overrated, but I think it's become like important, with like the Black Lives Matter movement and everything. So, as much as I don't really like that album, I'm gonna say yes. I think it actually is a classic.
Yeah, I mean, I think I prefer Good Kid, Mad City to this album, but I would definitely say that it's a classic.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I don't know. I find it a little bit overrated, and it's hard to say like if time will remember an album that's like very important to one specific moment. You know what I mean? There's a lot of like great protest music and stuff from the civil rights movement in the 60s that, I don't know, just has gotten like lost to time. It's like basically too dated now or something. And so I sometimes wonder if that will happen to Pimp a Butterfly, but right now it certainly feels like the kind of album that's a universal classic, even though it's not my favorite. Let me hit you with another one. Animal Collective's Merriweather Post Pavilion. Is that a classic?
Yeah, I think so. Is it Animal Collective's best album? Like, definitely not, in my opinion, but it is definitely the one that really like put them on the map. Everybody knows who Animal Collective is. I think that they get played on more alternative stations and stuff like that. Made them make the jump from like a small indie band to like a big rock band, famous rock group. So yeah, I think so.
I disagree. I don't think that this is a classic. I think it's overrated. I think it was I was really excited for it when it first came out and listened to it a lot. But the thing about classics is how does it age? And I don't think that this album or Animal Collective for that record, and I've said this before, I don't think they've aged very well.
It is very curious how they just like I don't know, the tide turned kind of in like similar to Taylor Swift or something. How like just suddenly it's like they were at the top of the world with Merriweather and everybody just got sick of them. And yeah, it sounds like very, mid 2000s all of a sudden, rather than like the trailblazers that they once were. As for me, I think it's definitely not my favorite Animal Collective album. It's quite strong, but at the same time, I feel like I gotta say it's a classic because it's had this staying power. It's like just remained in like the cultural memory, and they're kind of on the fringes type of band, but I think that like when our generation are the new dad rockers, Animal Collective will get name dropped by all the people getting like inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and stuff like that. And I feel like they will be, it's like the Velvet Underground or something, which is, nobody liked them when they were out, but all of a sudden it's like every, dad rock band loves them for some reason. And I feel like it'll be the same.
I'm not going to go as far as saying they're the Velvet Underground, but I could see what you're saying as being true. I agree.
All right. Well, let me hit you with another album. How about Frank Ocean's Channel Orange?
Nah, I don't think so. I never really enjoyed this album. I'm not a big fan of like, R&B stuff, but I think it got a lot of hype and it's kind of retained it because he hasn't released another album. And he's kind of like mysterious and like has somewhat like disappeared and everything, but I think once he drops another album, unless that one is like lives up to the hype, I think he'll just kind of get forgotten and this will be not the greatest classic ever.
Yeah, I don't know, I think I disagree. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of this album and never really could get all that into it. I think it's really cool, but I wouldn't fault anybody for wanting to call this a classic, and regardless of what he follows up with, I think this one will still hold up pretty well.
It's kind of an interesting album because actually I forgot to mention I made a couple threads on Mew asking what are some modern day classics, just to see if I had forgotten any. And this one kept coming up in replies, and it was something I had kind of forgotten about. And it's weird because it's like, it feels like a classic, but then it's like so easily forgotten. I feel like maybe it'll be like a cult classic or something like that. But in my opinion, it's fantastic. I think it's like a truly great album. I don't know about like a 10, but like a 9.7, 9.8 kind of album for me. I adore it, and I kind of enjoy like forgetting about it and rediscovering it every year or so. And I am so excited for his follow-up. I hope he doesn't pull in avalanches.
Ooh.
Not that they drop the ball. I just mean that it'll be 2 decades before we get that long-awaited follow-up. All right, I know how you guys are going to feel about this one, but I'll hit you with it anyway. Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Universal recent classic.
Without a doubt, that's going to go down as one of the greatest albums in hip hop history. That's without a doubt a classic.
Can't argue with Dan on that one.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I think it's just an incredible piece of work. It's like one of these few moments where, on first listen, you knew this was like a big moment in pop music history. And yeah, I think it'll be one of the biggest albums in rap history. I think it'll be one of the biggest albums in pop history. I think he's the next Prince, the next David Bowie, whatever. I'm going to lose all my credibility with the Kanye haters, but I don't even care because this album is so, so good. How about, I have no idea how to say this, Flying Lotus's Cosmogramma?
I don't know how to say that either, and I'm going to disagree. I don't think it's a classic. It's like okay. I'm not a big Flying Lotus fan in general. This will be forgotten.
I like this album like quite a bit when it first came out, but yeah, kind of similar to what Dan was sort of hinting at. I sort of forgot about it. Haven't really, when you look down this list, there's definitely, like when you say Kanye, I mean, there's just no question in my mind. But then to follow up with Flying Lotus, I can't even think that the two belong in the same ballpark,
I think he's one of these truly fabulous artists who, it's like his body of work is so good, and like his voice, his personality is so unique as a music producer that it's like you want him to have a classic, you know what I mean? Like Animal Collective would have been this way if they hadn't dropped Merriweather, which is like, okay, thank God they dropped their like perfect classic, and we can quibble about this album's better than that or whatever, but they never would have been like that next level superstardom in like music history without that classic, you know what I mean? And I feel like this is the album that people want this to be Flying Lotus's like mega classic, but it's kind of not. I really can't see why it's necessarily better than his last couple albums, which are all really strong to me. Does that make any sense to you guys?
Yeah,
I definitely agree, especially kind of like with the way you put it with Animal Collective. If they hadn't dropped Merriweather, I think it would be very difficult to say that they had any other stone cold classic in them from any of the previous albums, and I think the same could be said here for Flying Lotus.
All right, we talked about this one a little bit a couple episodes back, but how about Radiohead's In Rainbows? Is this a modern universal classic?
I think so. You were talking earlier about when we're old and the dad rock bands, Radiohead is going to be our generation's Led Zeppelin or something. In Rainbows will be that's one of their best records. It's going to be I think honestly most of their albums are going to be those classics in the similar vein as Led Zeppelin or something like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is an absolute classic. I mean, this is one of the three pillars of Radiohead, with Kid A and OK Computer I think being the other two. And on this list, I think this is the only one that can stand alongside and compete with Kanye West's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
I agree. I think this is some next level shit from Radiohead. Their reputation, their legend was already cemented with OK Computer and Kid A, and arguably a bunch of the others as, true classics that make them one of the all-time great bands. In Rainbows was sort of like a bonus, you know what I mean? It was like, it's like how you go from being like one of the greats to just like the great by dropping like extra Stone Cold classics. And I think this truly is a universal classic, and it sort of gets I don't think it's in the conversation of OK Computer and Kid A enough, but I think within a couple years' time, it will be seen as just as good as either of those.